Your kid's bike won't start. What do? Do you take it to a dealership, have them fix it for you, or do you want to try to do it yourself? Here are 4 things that you can look for to see why a bike won't start. Hopefully get them fixed, up and running in no time without having to spend a whole lot of money. What we're going to talk through today applies to a lot of different kinds of motorcycles, but we're going to use this 2015 TTR50 as an example, just to help through some of the process. One really good thing about these bikes is that you don't need a lot of tools to really work on them. So these are all the tools I'm going to need for this job. I have a metric set of T-handles for Allen keys, the hex keys, a Phillips head screwdriver, 2 flat blade screwdrivers, one that's thinner to get the carburetor jets out. I have a size 8 socket, a size 10 socket, and a spark plug socket. That's it. The first thing that you want to check is, does your bike have power? Do you get power from the battery? Some small bikes don't have batteries, they're kickstart only, but a lot of the newer 50s, they have batteries, which means they have electric starts. There are multiple switches you can check. On the TTR50, there is actually a key switch and a manual power switch on the handle. If you have both of those things on and the bike does not turn over, there's a very good chance your battery has been drained and you need to charge your battery. There is a really cool trick about these bikes. It also works on CRF50s and other small bikes. You can put the bike into gear with the power switches turned on, turn the wheel over, and get the bike started. Batteries do drain. Just like in a car, if you leave the door open or if you leave the overhead light on, the battery will drain down and the car won't start. Happens all the time. These bikes are the same way. If you leave the switch or the key turned on, it can still potentially draw the battery enough to drain it down where it won't start. So if you're not riding for a while, make sure that the switches are all turned off. Make sure that the battery is on a tender, which is a slow charger, if you can access it. On these TTR50s, there's not a very easy way to plug in a tender, so you do have to remove the battery if you need to charge it. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. The seat comes off with 2 bolts underneath the rear seat. Super simple, but make sure when you take the bolts out, you keep this little metal grommet. It sits inside the seat and they can fall out, but that's an important piece to keep, so make sure you keep an eye on those as they fall out. The battery sits right here on the left side of the frame. There are 3 Phillips head screws that hold the cover in place. The battery is held in place now with this little rubber strap. You may be able to take it off with your finger by just lifting up, but sometimes you need to get a screwdriver to get some extra leverage. And then the battery pops out to the front. Sometimes it's taking a little bit of force. There's a connector right here. You push down on the tab and the battery pops out. Now that you have the battery out, you can see why I say it's hard to charge while it's on the bike. These 2 little terminals here are very hard to get to unless you have the battery off. But you have these 2 tangs you can attach clamps to on your battery charger. Once the battery is charged, reinstall in the opposite way and you should be good to go. One other super simple thing you can check, if when you hit the start button absolutely nothing happens and the battery does have voltage to it, if you have a multimeter you can check that. Check this little fuse right here in the start or in the battery connector. If that fuse is popped or damaged, the bike will not start. Not all bikes have them in that location, so if you do have an electric start vehicle and it's not starting and the battery does seem to be charged, this is something else you can look for. It's trace the battery lines, find a fuse. Typically it's attached to the starter solenoid, but in this case it's attached to the battery. So you've got the battery all charged up. You know that the battery has power. When you flip the switches, the battery is delivering power to the starter, but it's still not starting. It's turning over and it's not going. The next simplest thing to check is your spark plug. If your spark plug isn't firing properly, then you have no combustion. So we're gonna pull that cap off. We're gonna look at the spark plug and see if it needs to be replaced. One other super simple thing that I may forget to check. I've had this happen where I go out on the track and then my bike stops running. It's because I forgot to turn the fuel switch on. You gotta make sure that it's in the on position. Some bikes have a reserve position too, so just make sure that it's in the right spot and not turned off. Otherwise the bike will not run. So the spark plug is typically on the top of the motor, but on these smaller bikes it can also be on the side because of where the cylinder is. So just follow the black spark plug wire down and you'll see the spark plug itself. Pop the boot off by hand, and this is where I said the spark plug wrench will come in handy. Main reason is because inside of the spark plug wrench is a little rubber boot that helps to grab the spark plug as you're pulling it out. So always good to have one handy. You can buy a pack from AutoZone or other types of mechanic shops. They will have a variety of sizes. That way, if you have multiple bikes, you can have the tool work for the job on all bikes. But we're pulling this out because the bike won't start, and there's a good chance that the spark plug itself is fouled and no longer causing a good strong spark. One thing you look for is the color. This spark plug is pretty well used. You can see how it's brown. It's a bit burned. I've seen worse. It doesn't look like it's blackened, so I wouldn't say that this is the major problem. So I do want to show you this before we fully replace the new spark plug. You can pull the spark plug out, put it back into the boot, and then ground it to the cylinder head to see if you get a spark out of it. Go ahead and hit the fire button. And you can see that this spark plug does still spark, but again, being as it's an issue with starting, I'm going to replace it anyway. But let me show you what the comparison would look like between a new one and a used one. So there's a pretty big difference there. And this spark plug, brand new, cost me about $3.20 US dollars. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one in, make sure that's not the problem, and we'll continue with the diagnosis after we check this out. With the new spark plug, let's see what happens. Still no fire, so we've crossed off 2 things on our list. That leaves 2 more. The next thing is going to be one of the easier of them. Let's check the air filter. Sometimes the air filter gets clogged, causes air not to get into the engine. Obviously you need air to create combustion. So let's check out that air filter, see if there's any issues with that. So the air filter location is specific to each model, but on the TTR50, the air box is this little plastic cover here on the left-hand side of the bike. You do not have to remove the seat or the battery cover to get to this spot. There are 3 Phillips head screws around the cover. All you have to do is take those screws off and you can expose the foam filter. On the TTR, there's a little snorkel here, goes into the frame, so you have to make sure you pull that out. It does have a little bit of force required, but not much at all. And behind that cover, you can see there is a foam filter here. This filter doesn't look too bad. There is a bit of a buildup of dust, but it's not degrading. Sometimes I pull these filters off and they're just chunks of foam. It just breaks apart. What happens then is the foam can get inside of the carburetor and clog up the jets. That's our 4th thing to look for. So being as this doesn't look bad, I'm going to assume that it's the carburetor on this bike. It's a very common problem. 9 times out of 10, if your little 50 will not start, it's the carburetor. So that's going to be the bulk of what we do in this fix, is fix that carburetor. So before we start to work on the carburetor, before we really pull it out or mess with the jets, we want to make sure we turn this fuel switch off. If we don't turn this off, when we pull the carburetor out, you may start leaking gas everywhere. So let's go ahead and turn this switch to off. Make sure that the arrow that's on the knob points to off. Usually it's in a horizontal position, so just check your manual for that to make sure you know that which is off. And then I like to drain the carburetor. There's often a little screw at the bottom of the carburetor there. And when you turn that screw, it'll have all the excess fuel that's in the bottom of the carburetor come out of this drain hose right here. So I'm loosening this screw, draining the gasoline out onto the shop towels. This will empty out any of the bad gas or old gas that's in the carburetor. Sometimes this is all you need to do to kind of reset the carburetor. So before I take it apart, I do want to try that. I drained out the bowl. I'm going to then close off that plug again by tightening it, turning it clockwise. Once it gets tight, so let's turn the fuel back on and let's fire the bike up, see what happens. Fuel switch on, main switch on, run switch on. Let's try it. No fire. That leads me to believe stuck pilot jet. It's the smallest hole inside the carburetor, probably clogged with just some ethanol. happens when the gas gets older. So let's pull the carburetor off and take a look at those jets. So we've charged the battery, we've checked the airbox, we've checked all the electrical connections, spark plug included, and we've cleaned the carburetor. Let's see if this will fire now. Remember, we had to turn all the switches off, so we're going to start from the beginning. We're going to turn on the main switch, turn on the run switch, turn the fuel on, fuel switch there. But now, it runs like it should. So of the 4 things, it was a carb clean on this one. Now we're back and ready to ride. Hopefully we can go ride this weekend. See you guys out there on the track. Stay safe, everyone.